Today marks the 20-year anniversary of Newsfirst. Over the years, many things have changed. However, we have not. Our direction and our policy remains put. The pledge that we made to the public 20 years ago, that we will always stand with you. Over the years, government and opposition MPs have criticized us. They continue to criticize us. And this bears testament to the fact that we are standing with you. We are standing with the people. We will continue to stand with you in the future as well. Expect the unexpected. We will be your eyes and ears. We will continue to be the voice of the people, the voice of the nation. 20 years of undisputed leadership. News First. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today is the state of the economy, budget 2016. Our guests this evening are Ms. Asoka Gunawardana, who is the Managing Director of the Strategic Enterprise Management Agency, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, Mr. W.A. Vijayawardena, and also former banker, Mr. Rusiripala Tennakon. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. We'll start off with the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, Mr. W.A. Vijayawardena. Mr. Vijayawardena, taking into account the statement that was made by Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe yesterday, are we bankrupt? Let me be a little bit less harsh. Is the country's economy in a crisis? Your time starts now.
To say that we are bankrupt is an overstatement, because no country becomes bankrupt because country's economy in any country is a diversified sector. We have lots of small economic units, and for the whole economy to become bankrupt, all these economic units will have to be bankrupt. So therefore, if we say that we are bankrupt, it's an overstatement.
Are we in a crisis?
But of course, we are in a crisis. We are not heading for a crisis. I might say we are in a crisis, but that crisis didn't start in this year. It started in year 2012, when our balance of payments was not in a very favorable situation, and the government budget has been a tricky position throughout the period, and the growth in the country, in the economy, had been overestimated by the authorities, and as a result, the crisis was not shown to the people, shown to the nation. Now, of course, we have come to a situation where we will not be able to hide it from the people anymore. Even the Prime Minister, in his statement yesterday, he had very clearly said that we cannot go on with the same type of the welfare that we had been given to people, because we cannot live beyond our earnings. That's the words that he used in his statement. Sri Lanka has come to a situation where Sri Lanka is no longer in a position to live beyond its earnings. Now, what we mean by earnings is, now every country has to produce something, and out of the production, earnings will come. But if you want to spend more than what you have earned, one day you will go to the wall, and when you are unable to scale the wall, you have to turn back and you have to collapse. Now, that is where we are today, because the government of Sri Lanka has been consuming more than what it should have done throughout the period, and as a result, the Prime Minister also has referred to that particular factor. The tax revenue has fallen from about 19% of our total income in year 2000 to less than 12% in 2014, and 2015 is worse. So as a result, when the government is spending more and more money, we are living beyond our means, and how we had financed it in the past has been that we had been borrowing heavily. We were lucky because we were a poor country for the most part of our post-independence period. Therefore, we were able to get concessionary borrowings from the multilateral lending agents like World Bank, ADB and so forth. But when we had reached the lower middle income level, we are no longer in a position to get those concessionary funding. So we had to go to the market. And when we borrow from the market, the interest rates are around 6%, 7%, and it's not a free lunch that is being given to us by the rest of the world. So that is why we have to now address this economic crisis immediately, and if we don't do that, we are heading towards a bigger situation.
Thank you very much. That, of course, was the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, Mr. W.A. Vijayawardena. Let's now move on to Mr. Asoka Abegunawardena, who is the Managing Director of the Strategic Enterprise Management Agency. We are in a crisis now. Is this what the people expected? Mr. Abegunawardena, your time starts now.
I am not an economist, so
as a layman, what is your
as a layman, the way
opinion?
I look at it, actually, now in January we had a mini budget, which was concentrating mainly on the short-term benefits that can be given to the public. And this time, I believe we need to think of long-term strategies and how we are coming to address the issue of the economy. In that context, I don't think there's an additional burden during this year, mainly due to the low oil prices worldwide, which is due to global political reasons, and also these days we are experiencing the record higher level of reservoir levels in the Mahaveli and Lakshapana complexes, which secure us that during the next 6 months, first 6 months of the next year, the power and energy sector is not a burden to the economy. So it's beyond that. Now we need to discuss about the long-term issues that created this situation. I believe the core reason is that the long-term investments made had no return as expected, or they were not expecting, they did not have a proper plan for payback. So that may be the reason, to best of my knowledge. So for the future, what we need to discuss seriously is that the crisis is not only local. My understanding is that this is a global situation, as the development paradigm of the human civilization is shifting from a destructive development towards sustainable development. So it's going to be a new era altogether. As we were expecting certain issues during the original development we had, we need to face the situation on economic fronts, on social fronts, and also on the environmental front. So if we are to consider this budget as a new initiative for the new era, then what we need to understand is whether this budget will really address the concerns raised in the Maitri Palanayak manifesto, which is mainly based on sustainable development. So that shift, we need to wait and see whether that will happen when the budget is proposed. But the preface made yesterday by the Prime Minister indicate that there may be some aggressive changes on the policy side.
Mr. Abegunawardena, I just want to, before we move on to Mr. Tennakon, I want to pose another question to you. You said that the energy sector, the power energy sector, will not have a major bearing on the country's economy in the future. However, prices of petrol have been reduced significantly after there was a change of governance in the country. Is this reflecting your pocket, Mr. Abegunawardena?
Well, actually, now the benefit that passed to the consumers was due to prevailing prices. So this year there was no drastic change in that setup. So
do you spend less? Very simply, do you spend less now when you go to the market as a layman,
well,
or do you spend more?
That depends actually.
Right,
so
that depends, Mr. Abegunawardena. We now move on to Mr. Rusirpala Tennakon, who is a banker. Mr. Tennakon, yesterday the Prime Minister's speech, I in fact initially thought that it was someone from Singapore making the speech. There seemed to be a foreign blend in the Prime Minister's speech. Is it because the Governor of the Central Bank is a citizen from Singapore, or is it because the Prime Minister thinks that the best way to ensure that Sri Lanka goes on the right track is to adopt the Singapore model? Your time starts now.
Yes, I am in full agreement with you, because quite contrary to the situations that my friends just now stated is the current situation, we are proposing a budget which does not reflect that thinking in per se as it exists. Because what I see is there is a very strong blend, a foreign blend in this budget, which is very, very significantly visible. Now, there are, despite the fact that we are undergoing a crisis, we are in a crisis, in the midst of a crisis, there is provision and proposals for the creation of many agencies, many bodies which are totally foreign and entirely new to the country. And the concentration that is required at a time like this, when we are undergoing a crisis, when we are in the middle of a crisis, to increase the productivity, taking into account the available resources which are not at any cost to the government or cost to the country. I don't see much focus on that in that area in this budget. Instead, we have the creation of so many bodies, new bodies, like the sovereign wealth trusts and creation of the Temasek style Singapore investment controlling funds. So that type of thing. So I'm wondering whether we have deviated a bit from the concerns that were addressed by His Excellency the President about the need to focus on the agricultural background and to achieve self-sufficiency through agriculture and to revive the economy on an agricultural base. So there is a bit of apparently a conflict in this. This is what I observe. So with all these things add to a situation for the country to think very seriously whether, unlike in the other previous occasions, whether the country can expect concessions and benefits and reduction of prices and that type of thing in a situation like this. Prime Minister has very correctly stated that don't expect what we can afford more than what we can afford to give you. So that's a danger signal that he has given, and also a warning to the public that you should not expect much concessions or what more than what has been offered. So this is, we are going through a stage where the entire country will have to get together, shoulder the burden of carrying the country forward in a very conscious manner, if necessary, with many sacrifices.
Many sacrifices. Tighten your belts. Is that what this government is trying to tell the people? We'll discuss all this and more on the second round. Let me introduce our journalist this evening. On to my immediate right is Nadine Majid. Nice to have you on board, Nadine, as usual. And we have young Chaturanga on my far left. Good evening, Chaturanga, and welcome aboard. And we have our investigative journalist, Faraz Shaukat Ali, without the files today, Faraz. What is the reason? Now, don't tell me that it's a technology that is going to help you out today.
It's technology. Technology and us.
Technology indeed. We now move on with the Q&A. Let's start off with young Chaturanga.
Thank you, Shamir. I would like to raise my first question to Mr. Usiripala. Now, it was discussed that the economy of the country is at a crisis. Why? Doesn't the government have a short-term, a medium-term and a long-term plan to tackle this crisis?
Well, it is a very well-known fact that we are inherited a very huge debt burden in this country that has been carried on for so many years. So this nobody can deny this. And also we have exhausted virtually all our borrowings and aid schemes, whatever is available currently under normal circumstances. So unless we resort to some very special mechanisms for rectifying the situation from the international agencies, we have a very difficult task in bridging a budget of this in a stage like this. That is what we are really facing.
True, but now we know that the inflation rate on food alone, which was at 12% when it came to in December last year, dropped to 2.5 in August. And we know that the 3,500 rupees is going to be added to the festival advance that is going to be given to estate workers for Deepavali. So aren't these good signs? Isn't the government taking steps to maybe, provide, as you said, a little concession to the people who are in distress?
Well, looking at it from the point of view of granting concessions, I agree with you. But is that what we are looking for now? What we really want to use the labor force in this country is to increase the productivity in the long run. not to grant them concessions and then just keep them in this present situation. We are all undergoing a phase where we really need to change the outlook what we have been having. That change must come about and that change must be brought about. So the policy package or the announcement should contain basically factors that lead towards that increasing of the productivity. So I would very much like to focus much on that rather than asking the government or even criticize, looking at it from the point of view of how much they are going to give as a festival advance or how much they are going to give as a concession.
Mr. Vijayawardene, is the government acting like a government, or is it acting like the opposition, being in the opposition for a very long time? It seems that they are not taking an overall look at the country's economy. What are your views on this?
Well, I think if you go through the Prime Minister's statement very carefully, what he has done is he has actually highlighted the economic ills facing the country which he has inherited from the previous administration that he has to do. Then he has come up with a new program of action which would, according to him, rescue the country from the current economic crisis. Then there is a proposal to go for this medium to long term economic plan, economic reform, through which he is going to deliver prosperity to the country. So it's a kind of a three pronged analysis that he has done, and therefore it's a part of that. It's, you know, as you say, the first part is like he's still in opposition, but the second and third parts definitely he is going to act like
we
the
expected
government.
the Prime Minister or the Finance Minister to make the budget speech on the 20th of November. Is this the first part of the budget speech that the Prime Minister delivered
normally
yesterday?
the first part of the budget speech contains an analysis of the economy and how we are going to move forward. But of course now, since there was an election and the new government was elected to power in August, there is a requirement that the government has to make an announcement about the new economic policy that is going to do. And this is specifically important because the new government said in its election manifesto that is going to introduce a knowledge-based, competitive, social market economy to Sri Lanka. So somebody has to explain it.
On that note, Mr. Vijayawardene, you said according to him, in your response, according to the Prime Minister, that is, that this will, that these steps will help resolve these economic ills. When you say according to him, is it because you disagree with the Prime Minister?
No, I mean, I have to look at it as an independent observer, because when I look at it as an independent observer, you can see now, even Mr. Asoka Begunwadana said that the President wants to develop the country on the base of the agricultural base of the country. And same thing was referred to by Mr. Tusipar Tenokon also. But the Prime Minister's main concern is not that. Prime Minister's main concern is even in the agriculture, you have to go for a value addition in the agriculture. So that is why there is not a kind of a disagreement. But what I see is that the philosophy that he has pronounced in his statement is not being shared by the majority people in the government.
Mr. Vijayawardene, for a very long time now, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe has been viewed by many people among the public and especially among the UNP faithful. He's been viewed as an economic savior, a wizard. Has the wizard lost his wand?
No, what I see is that, I mean, if you look at the statement, which is a synopsis, because every word in the statement and every sentence in the statement has to be developed into a separate thesis, because it has to be developed into a separate program of action. So that has to be done by the government. I mean, the Prime Minister has just given the synopsis, but the actual work has to be done by people.
So as you say, there appears to be a disconnect between the President, the Prime Minister and even the Cabinet.
What I see is that there is a kind of now the President just looks at the short-term economic imperatives rising from the agricultural sector. But the Prime Minister's vision is something else. What I read from the statement is that he wants to introduce a digitized economy to Sri Lanka, connect Sri Lanka to the rest of the world, And therefore, for Sri Lanka to get the maximum out of our connection to the international economy, because that's why he has referred to the fact that King Parakrama the Great, during that time we had been well connected to the rest of the world by means of international trade. He has proposed in his statement also that we should go for that kind of an economic policy.
Mr. Abegunathan, as a policy maker, as the managing director and chairman of SEMA, as a policy maker, do you see a disconnect between the president's vision and the prime minister's vision in terms of the economy and development and sustainable development?
It's too early to say so, because I don't think there's a clear two different strategies there. Now, when you look at the Maitri Palnayak statement manifesto, there are altogether 11 sectors covering all these sectors. One aspect is agriculture, I agree, but in the other sectors, he has highlighted the other issues as well. So, on the other hand, the Prime Minister's statement and his emphasis towards agriculture is not an issue. Value addition is also a must, and in addition to go for sustainable agriculture, all those things are included in that policy. So there's no clear difference between the two approaches. And in addition, I think he's highlighting some of the issues stated in this document, like the introducing the Thamasek model to the state-owned enterprises. That's to improve efficiency. It is stated in this, but how it is going to happen, and there may be differences there. The only key difference we had up to until recently between the UNP and SLFP was, the UNP was not adequately addressing the issue of inequality. Here, he's making clear statement that though we have become a lower middle income country, the gap is widening. We need to address that issue. So to answer now the possible way of handling the current crisis, it's not to tighten the belts of the poor. Still, there's a margin, there's a widening gap between the rich and the poor, so there's a margin in which we can provide some concessions to the poor while not affecting the overall economy.
The finance minister has also echoed these views. He's talking about more taxes on people who can afford to pay more taxes. It appears that the UNP, a traditionally capitalist party, is now of the stance, so at least senior UNP leaders are of the stance, that the rich in Sri Lanka are not paying their dues. Do you agree?
That's exactly the point I was raising now. Now, if there was a difference between the SLP and UNP, now it's no more.
But do you believe that the rich in Sri Lanka, that the wealthy class in Sri Lanka are not paying their dues?
I think so. Not only locally, even at the international level, the rich countries and the poor countries, there's a gap within the country. There's a wide gap. So addressing all those issues is essential if we are to shift from this destructive development towards sustainable development.
One more question, Faraz. One more question I get back. Mr. Wijewardena, the finance minister is talking about raising 2,000 billion rupees in tax revenue. Is this feasible? Is it viable?
Well, not immediately, because if you have to introduce a tax reform program takes time. You have to design it, you have to plan it and implement it. Then the money comes only after that. So there's a time lag involved in any particular tax implementation program. So therefore not immediately, but over the medium term, the Prime Minister's concern is that he wants to change the tax structure from indirect taxes to direct taxes. Right now it is 80 to 20%. He has clearly stated in his statement he wants to change it to 60 to 40. So therefore your concern that the rich people are not paying taxes is going to be addressed through that particular policy.
So we'll move on to Faraz now. Faraz?
Mr. Wijewardena, the Prime Minister appears to enjoy a persona that he is the leading economist, all set to solve our problems. How true is that? I mean, how true is that expectation? Within weeks of his taking over office, we had the central bank bonds scandal. And several weeks thereafter, we had the highway robbery. And the Prime Minister doesn't want to explain these matters. Why is it that he is acting the way?
Well, of course, I think what you have expressed here is a black mark. I'll have to say it's a black mark, because any government which has announced to the electorate that it is going to introduce good governance principles and follow the proper economic policy governance, because I am referring here to proper economic policy governance, where we will have to eliminate the possibility of having that kind of scandals in the administration, because we find that even in the developed countries, whenever such scandals occur, even in Japan and Italy, the government has been very strict. And if you go back to Singapore, the Lee Kuan Yew has very clearly said, even a minister behaving in an improper way, if it is brought to the notice of the government before the members of the public raise that issue, he will take action against the minister. So therefore, I think the way that the whole situation has been handled by Sri Lanka is it's much more desired.
But how can we have good governance when last week or week before we had a statement saying that in the press that the Prime Minister had intervened in the matter of MP Vimal Weerawansa's passport affair? Well, why should ministers get involved in?
Those are actually, in my view, because I am just speaking as an independent citizen of the country, they violate the principles of the rule of law. Because the whole nation voted for Maithripala Sirisena at the last general presidential election to bring the rule of law back to Sri Lanka, restore rule of law, law and order, and economic policy governance. So when there are accusations that the politicians intervene in that kind of an transaction, it actually doesn't go along with the principles of rule of law.
Mr. Rusripala, what do you have to say?
Well, I see there is however much we are trying to sort of hide it or cover it up, there is definitely a gap to be filled in the government and in the governmental affairs. It's true that the country voted President Maithripala Sirisena to that position, but the situation is the government that is in power today, it's not just one-sided government. It comprises of 2 or 3 parties which had conflicting interests some time back. We can't get behind the fact that, in Sinhala it is called Gadraba Gong Yoga, that is the buffalo-cow combination. True that they are together, but still that difference exists. As a little while ago, one of you from the journalists mentioned, that is there a situation that there is a difference of opinions and things like that. I think it is true to some extent. We can't get behind the fact that it was the SLFP basically was a very socialist oriented party, and one of you very rightly said that the UNP was a capitalist party. I'm not saying this, but then that difference still exists, and from some of the things that are pronounced in this budget, I think it gives us the impression that the priority that should have been given to certain areas in the current situation have been diverted to very foreign originating or thinking subjects, like the creation of new funds and sovereign funds and things like that. And the danger is in whose custody these funds are going to be. We are talking of the Temasek example. The Temasek example is not the best from what we know inside. In the Temasek example in Singapore, Prime Minister's wife, Singapore, was in charge of the fund. And there have been many instances where the fund was not properly used, and there were mistakes in the investments that was done through the fund.
So what you're saying is we need to have some professionals in there.
I think so. I think in the selection of people and in the selection of the orientation of the people in those funds, it is a very, very important thing.
So friends and classmates don't count, then?
A very unfortunate situation. We
Mr.
have to think beyond that.
Mr. Vijayavardhana, we spoke of good governance. We saw recently statements being made by 2 powerful ministers of the present regime over avant-garde, and you have the Prime Minister expressing a different of opinion with regard to avant-garde. Isn't this a blow to good governance?
Well, of course, yes. I mean, anyone who would have watched the situation will come to the conclusion that the way that the cabinet ministers have behaved is not in accordance with the principles of good governance. That is, of course, there. But of course, it happens. I mean, I can quote you now, when J.R. Jayawardena was president, Mr. M.D. Jayawardena was a very senior UNP. Even he was had the same seniority as Mr. J.R. Jayawardena. In one of the budget speeches, he criticized the budget speech in Parliament. J.R. Jayawardena immediately asked him to resign, because he said, this is not the place where you have to criticize it. You were in the cabinet, and at the cabinet, when the budget was presented to cabinet, you would have criticized it, and without doing that, you come to Parliament and making that announcement. You have violated the collective responsibility of the cabinet, and you have to resign. So that is how even J.R. Jayawardena, he treated to a very senior cabinet minister of his party.
What must the Prime Minister do in such an event?
I mean, it's very clear. I mean, if it has happened in UK, by now the Prime Minister would have asked the particular minister to resign. I am not referring to Sri Lanka. I am going by the examples in other countries.
Mr. Vijayawardena, in terms of the government's vision, the government's policy to make the private sector the engine of growth, how would such a statement reflect or impact?
The private sector always looks at the unity in the government, because political stability is one of the prerequisites for any one of us, not only the private entrepreneurs, even as private citizens. Political stability is one of the prime concerns for us to look beyond what we see tomorrow. If you are to take action for the medium to long term, next 5 to 10 year period, we must look at the type of political environment that we will be facing. So when there is questions about the political stability as a result of the incidents that have taken place in the recent past, it will not be viewed favorably by the private sector.
Mr. Tennakoon,
Go ahead.
6 acts were presented in Parliament on the 30th of October. Few of which being the inland revenue tax, the nation building tax, the value added tax, and even Mr. Vijayawardena spoke on the tax revenue decreasing from 19% to it coming down. We had an instance where the governor of the central bank coming forward and saying the tax, there was an issue in the taxation system. Is there issue in the taxation system, and how can we overcome it?
I think the tax reforms necessarily has to be accompanied with the policy plans that the country puts forward. That's a must, because that has to go side by side. The tax reformations as well as the new policy introductions, if they are new, has to go hand in hand. Therefore, there has to be tax reforms. But I think the Prime Minister has very clearly indicated a relief measure, I should say, from 80 to 20, as Mr. Vijayawardena said, to 60 to 40 situation between the direct and the indirect taxes. That itself is propagated indirect concession to the public, the people at large, rather than the big taxpayers. But I want to say one thing about these conflicting statements that have been made. That was a question that was raised to Mr. Vijayawardena. I would like to make one comment. This avant-garde issue is not the first time that we are observing this. In more serious situations and on serious matters, we have seen this controversy surfacing. Now, for example, the megalopolis proposal of the Prime Minister. The megapolis. It is the megalopolis is the correct word. Megapolis. The megapolis proposal of the Prime Minister, which he seems to be very, very interested in implementing. Even it has been mentioned even in this policy declaration how it is going to be done. The minister in charge made a different statement. He said, I want a homegrown situation. Whereas the Prime Minister went to the Singapore model, and he was more relying on that situation and trying to get advisors and consultants from overseas. So these conflicts we are to live up with now in a situation like this.
You mentioned the wife of the Singapore president having ownership of the fund. In a hypothetical situation, if this is adapted, who do you think should hold the responsibility of maintaining the fund?
Well, it depends on what things you absorb into the fund. For example, if funds like the trust fund and the provident fund, those funds are absorbed into this one and to be managed under this, most certainly the people who have an ownership to those funds must be represented in the boards, like the trade unions.
Mr. Abegunawardena, with regard to what Mr. Tennakoon was saying about the megapolis project, about the Prime Minister and the Minister in charge having different ideas, I take it that you have been closely associated with the Minister in charge in the past. I'm not sure if you still have that association or not. But how do you see this megapolis project going forward?
Well,
it's been a pet project of the Prime Minister's. I mean, even before the presidential election, the Prime Minister was talking about the megapolis project in meetings with the business community. So how do you see the difference between the Prime Minister and the
statement of the Prime Minister, but anyway, we need to understand that we cannot replicate the Singapore model here in Sri Lanka due to two reasons. The conditions are different in Sri Lanka, and on top of that, during that particular era, the trend was towards the new industrialized countries. Trend was something else. What we are discussing right now is totally different. We are shifting away from that model to a new era. In that context, I think we cannot replicate Singapore model in Sri Lanka, and we need to find a green solution here. So to that extent, I agree with the Minister's statement, but I have no idea whether that's in conflict with what the Prime Minister has stated.
You are still supporting the subject, Minister.
I have no link with him right now, but I am supporting his views on that.
We're now going for a short commercial break. A gap to be filled. We are in a crisis. You cannot hide the truth. It does not mean that we have to tighten our belts. Some key points. We're going for a short commercial break. When we come back, corruption, good governance, and the state of the country's economy. All this and more on Face the Nation. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. We now start the third round with Mr. W. Vijayawardena, the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank. Mr. Vijayawardena, President Maithripala Sirisena, following the 17th August general elections, made a statement. He said heads of institutes should be appointed following a committee review that will be made by the President and the Prime Minister. However, my question to you is, why isn't this applying to the Central Bank? Your time starts now.
Okay. Now, in fact, you would have noted Prime Minister himself has said that he is going to reform and restructure the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, which is a good move. I can recall that in 2002, when he became the Prime Minister, we initiated action to reform the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. We even drafted the new Central Banking Act, and we were to appoint, because there must be some transparency in the selection of the people holding the top positions in the Central Bank. Because the reason is, now Central Bank as the custodian of the money that it has issued. Now in my pocket, if I have 5,000 rupees, I have simply placed the trust in the governor and the monetary board in protecting the money, the value of the money that I am having. So I have a right to get the best man to serve me. Just like, if I have an ailment, I have the right to get the best physician to treat me. So in other countries, when the governor and the monetary board members are appointed to the central bank, there is a selection process. For example, now if you take Bank of Canada, they start the selection process 2 years before the incumbent governor retires. It's made the public announcement that the governor is going to retire and the nominations are called for. People can nominate people, other people, then there's a selection committee who will go into the credentials of the person to be appointed. Then 3 names are submitted to the appointing authority for selection as the governor of the central bank. Now what we suggested in year 2002 when we amended the Central Banking Act, we wanted to introduce the new amendments to the Central Banking Act, that is the selection process not only for the governor but also for the members of the monetary board. The reason is, as patients, we have the right to get the best medical treatment from the people who are treating us.
Do we have the best man?
That's the question. That's why, because I don't want to comment on the incumbent governor or the incumbent board members.
Understood.
But what I say is, as a principal, as a person and as a citizen of the country who has held the money created by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka as my asset, I have a right to get the best service from the people in the Central Bank.
Mr.
So that is
Vijayavardhana,
why
you
we
said-
want to introduce good reforms.
Mr. Vijayavardhana, you said that the Prime Minister had made a statement to reform the Central Bank. When will he do it? Is he waiting until another bond scam take place? in the
Well, I
Central
think he
Bank?
has to immediately start it. Immediately start it, because now, as Mr. Rusipal Tennakoon said, there are two other reforms that he had actually proposed in the statement. One is the reform of the Central Bank. Second one is taking the EPF away from the Central Bank and amalgamating it ETF and setting up a separate Social Security Board. Third one is decriminalizing the Exchange Control Act. Instead of the Exchange Control Act, he is going to introduce Exchange Management Act, where the exchange control offences are not treated as criminal activities but as civil offences, so that anybody who has violated it, he can pay the fine and he can go away. But right now, in terms of the way that the Exchange Control Act has been drafted, it's a criminal activity and you can go to jail. So,
Mr.
most of the
Vijayavardhana,
people in the
served-
country will go to jail.
You have served the Central Bank extremely well. People still talk about you, the services that you have rendered in terms of ensuring the monetary, biggest monetary biggest monetary bank in Sri Lanka to be protected. You played a pivotal role in all this. You said reforms need to start immediately. Does that reform mean that the top post of the Central Bank needs to change as well?
Well, you don't have to change the top post. What is needed today is that there must be a committee appointed immediately look into, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel, because there is already a draft legislation which we prepared in the year 2002 and bring it out, and you have to amend it. You can update it. That's what is needed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vijayavardhana, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank. I now move on to, not right now for us, not right now. Your Q&A will start in a bit after the end of the third round. I know you can't wait to ask a question for us. Sometimes it's very difficult to control you. I now move on to Mr. Rusipal Tennakoon, who was a former banker as well. Mr. Tennakoon, amalgamating the EPF and ETF funds, we saw over the last year or so, 2 times. People were talking about the EPF and ETF funds, and people were talking about what is going on to our money. Amalgamating these funds, would that work? The time starts now.
Yeah, this is one of the very significant things that we have to take note of in this policy statement made by our Prime Minister, because it is not merely an amalgamation of the ETF and the EPF that he has pronounced. He has also said that there is a pension or a social security scheme behind it. But from our experience in the past, what happened recently in the country and some years ago, a decade ago, in the 90s, late 90s, when the same UNP government wanted to abolish the EPF and convert that to a pension scheme, there was chaos in the country. All the trade unions rose against it. Then subsequently, during the period of Mahinda Rajapaksa, very recently, when they wanted to convert the part of the Provident Fund into the formation of a new pension scheme, we can still remember what happened. So therefore, this is a very, very critical thing from the point of view of the reaction of the working people. What I would suggest is that no action should be taken to merge these funds without a proper social security or a pension scheme proposal in place. It's going to be very tricky and very dangerous and very bad, and particularly it is in the context of who is going to be in charge of these funds. You know, our experiences are, we have advisors in this country who have been serving as investing advisors in other countries, who have gone and invested in wrong places. For example, Bernard Madoff, 150 years in jail today. There are people who recommended investments with him. Are we going to give our funds belonging to the workers of this country to be in charge of people who have a background, who recommending investments of this nature? It's a really, really dangerous situation. The so-called investment bankers on whom some of our top government officials are relying today, they must carefully look at it, review the situation, because all these investment bankers, so-called investment bankers, have not done the best. The country is beginning to realize the multinational corporations behind the banks and those banks which are multinationals, what their follies are going to only come out now. They are coming to the open right now. Their investment portfolios, how bad it has been. Therefore, it is very, very important to entrust the investments and particularly the funds in the right hands of people. Particularly the pension funds in the world today are a concern of investors, because if you take, for example, I just cite one example. In the year 2012, the world sovereign fund total was, if I remember correct, it was 6.5 trillion US dollars. In the same year, the total value of the pension funds in the world aggregate was 32.8 trillion US dollars. So they know, those investors and advisors know where this money is accumulated. We have to be very, very cautious and careful.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tendukon. We have to stop it at there. Before we move on to the statement of Mr. Asoka Gunawardena, I want to quickly ask Mr. Vijayawardena a question with regard to the EPF and ETF funds. I recollect between 2000 and 2004, when you were there at the central bank, you proposed the Social Security Board of Sri Lanka. However, this was not implemented because of one of the former Treasury Secretaries in Sri Lanka. Is this the typical scenario we're looking at?
No, actually,
in terms of
what happened was that,
funds?
as Mr. Tendukon mentioned, it was not a mere amalgamation of the EPF and ETF that had been under consideration. We were planning to introduce an affordable and sustainable social security system for the all people in Sri Lanka. It's not only the people who are in employment, but those people who are not in employment but in the informal sector and self-employed people. For all these people, we need the social security system in the country. So our concern was to introduce a sustainable social security system in which the amalgamation was simply to improve the efficiency of the existing employees' provident fund. That's all.
Why do you think the former Treasury Secretary opposed this?
Actually, what happened was we had prepared the draft legislation, we had the plan, and we were to introduce the system, and somehow the previous government didn't consider it as a worthwhile enterprise.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vijayawardena. I now move on to Mr. Asoka Gunawardena. Mr. Asoka Gunawardena, very quickly, are you a contributor to EPF or ETF?
Yes.
Do you contribute? Yeah. So this question is for you. Are you worried about what's going to happen to your money? The time starts now.
Yes, I am worried, and I believe all the employees who get this facility is worried, because it's our money. So we need to the government should be very careful. They are handling our money, so it should be transparent and should make sure that we will get the benefit as it's our money. So to that extent, I agree that it should be done very carefully. Now, looking at what we are expecting from the budget, as a socialist, I welcome that Prime Minister suggesting to address the issue of inequality. I welcome that as a socialist. I welcome his statement that we are working towards sustainable development as an environmentalist. Now, the issue is how we are going to do it. And I believe now most of the discussions we had, I think from your side you are trying to discuss about the individuals. My belief is that it's not the individuals that's important, but the processes. So we need to try to establish proper processes so that individual cannot play drastic change what's going to happen. So the intentions behind an individual, it's not that important if you have the processes in the right direction. So according to that context, now the government is trying to come up with new mechanisms, number of mechanisms. I think certain mechanisms may challenged by the public. So now they need to very carefully prioritize what mechanisms we should propose at the right time. If you are coming up with drastic changes on all fronts, then it will be in a chaotic situation. So we need to be very carefully prioritize what we are going to do first, and so on.
Mr. Abhimanyu, I want to interrupt you for a second there. You said not individuals, but the processes have to change. However, you have a good process and a mechanism in place. You have a corrupt individual at the top spot. Would that work?
No, that's not what I'm saying is, if now the individuals cannot, they have to work within the the rules of the game. If the processes are defined in such a way that then individuals cannot make a drastic change. Now we are discussing now after the January 8th, we change the phases, not the processes yet. So what we need is the processes change. But on top of that, for what is the most important thing I want to address. Now if we are looking at the proposals that may come in the future, now we had free education, free healthcare services. Instead of privatizing or doing major changes to those things, what we need to do is to get the optimum best out of the free education and free healthcare system that's there, because in most instances we see that the free education has not led towards the development of the economy, because some of the people leave the country and others have no employment opportunities. So we need to change those mechanisms so that whatever we invest is will lead to for the economic benefit.
Mr. Abhimanyu, you mean to say that the process still remains, however the top spots changed? Is that what you're trying to say?
That's exactly what's happening, because we didn't make drastic changes other than the 19th Amendment, and we are just beginning to have these independent commissions. So until the processes are complete, then the existing processes exist.
So the format is change the people first and then change the processes.
No. The point is now who is committed to do the change.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Asoka Begunwardana. Q&A will start off with Faraz.
Could you tell me, please? The Prime Minister has said that he will look into the bond issue at Cork, but he's going to do all 10 years, Rajapaksa as well. Honestly, what good will come out of it? Can we get our money back? Can we force the company to give the money back?
You have to really appreciate the fact that those are sovereign bonds issued.
Yeah.
Once you issue those bonds, there's only one way to recall it. You have to retire it. The retirement comes by repaying the bond. The governments can always do that. They can recall whatever the bond they have issued, and they can retire it prematurely. That they can do. But the issue was not that. The issue was that if there was a conflict of interest or if there's an irregularity, and that would be investigated by a select committee of Parliament. That is what Prime Minister has promised. I hope that that would happen.
Could I also ask you, you've been at the Central Bank, so perhaps you can tell us, does the Governor of the Central Bank swear an oath of allegiance?
Well, what happens is that in the past, the person who is to be appointed as the Governor of the Central Bank, he will go before the appointing authority and get his letter of appointment. And there is no any other oath of allegiance that you have to swear, in my view. And what happens is now every year we have to submit our own assets and liability statements. At the same time, we are swearing that we are upholding the constitution of the country. So that is a normal routine activity which anyone who is holding a public office has to do in this country. So therefore it's not necessarily related to the Governor of the Central Bank, but all the employees of the Central Bank have to do that.
Including the Governor?
Including Governor.
So but the governor here is a foreigner.
No, it doesn't matter because there is no any restriction in Sri Lanka for appointing a foreigner as the governor of the central bank. For example, the first governor, Mr. John Exter, was a US citizen. But in other countries, I know, for example, Nigeria, they have specifically said the person to be appointed as the governor of Nigeria's central bank should be a natural Nigerian. He's not a person who should get the citizenship by registration. But in the case of UK, now the current governor holding the position of the Bank of England, he was a Canadian citizen, but after he assumed the position as the governor, he changed his citizenship from Canadian to the British citizens.
Mr. Vijayavardhan, do you think that the integrity of the governor of the central bank has come into question?
But what did you ask?
Do you think that the integrity of the governor of the central bank has come into question?
No, what I would like to say is this. Now, if you go back to this extra report, which gives the fine principles of how the governor, deputy governor and all other officers should behave, it has very clearly said the person to be appointed as the governor should be a person with unquestioned integrity. Unquestioned. So that means if the integrity has been questioned by somebody, whether it is due to good reason or bad reason, it actually gives a bad signal to investors in the country. So we have to look at it from that point of view, because the way that it has been defined is the way that the John Exter expected the governor to behave. It's a person of unquestioned integrity.
The present governor, integrity question?
That, of course, I am not in a position to make any comment, because it's up to this parliamentary committee to be appointed. We'll have to investigate and come up with
Mr. Tennakoon, your views on this? Do you think the present governor's integrity has come into question?
It has, definitely, because this is a public matter. This is a matter that has been discussed publicly, and various things concerning his conduct, concerning the particular transaction in question, have been discussed in public. So from what we see from those or arising out of those, we can clearly say that he has done things that he shouldn't have done. I mean, I'll confine it to only that. I don't know.
Let me ask you a question. The imports and the exports. The imports in the first quarter of 2015 increased by, if I'm correct, 5.7%. However, the exports have fallen by 0.6%. Now, there was a government change in the beginning of the year. This is seen widely as a good outcome for the country. But however, in the international market, the Sri Lankan demand for Sri Lankan goods have decreased by 0.6%. Do we have to address this issue?
Exactly. I mean, the Prime Minister's statement is very clear on that, because he has actually referred to the fact that our exports are declining as a percentage of GDP on the one hand, and as a percent of the global exports on the other. Because if you look at year 2000, our exports were some 33% of our GDP. Year 2014, it has come down to a level of around 12%, and 2015 it will be still lower than that. And as a percent of the global exports, it has come down from 0.8% to 0.5% now. So that means, even though Sri Lanka has been a trading nation which has dependent on exports for creating wealth in the country, we have not done well in that area during the first 15 years of the new millennium. So we have to address this issue, and to address this issue, the Prime Minister's statement very clearly says he has to introduce complex technology to Sri Lanka, which you have been advocating. Instead of doing the simple products like garments, we have to move from simple products to complex products. So he wants to do that by getting the best international investments into the country, so that we will get technology to do so.
Mr. Usripala, we were on the topic of megapolis development. Now, for the past 5 years, the Sri Lankan, the industrial sector, the construction sector has been was vitalized for the past 5 years. However, when the new government came into power, we saw a decline in the construction activity that was going on, and this has in a way triggered the consumption-related expenditure of the people of the country. Is this statement correct?
Well, I don't think that I don't know how we can connect the consumption and the construction boom, because the consumption is entirely a different issue, and then the construction boom is another issue as far as I can see. But then this construction problem, it's true that it came to a sudden halt in this country recently, but it has been, even in countries like Singapore, the construction boom is no more, and they are now looking for avenues to send out their engineers and architects and to other places if possible. That is the reality. So we are, I think, probably trying to, in that context, get their services here in the future, maybe with the hope that they can do a better job here than our own architects and the engineers who are engaged very much in the construction boom.
Do you think the construction activities that were carried out in the country will come to a standstill or come to a pause?
Well, the phase that we are seeing now is that there is a bit of a slowdown.
Mr. Asoka Gunawardena, initially, I recollect a few months ago, the present regime said that there'll be free Wi-Fi across the country. However, now, taking a look at what the Prime Minister said yesterday, it has been restricted to only universities. Do you think they're making pledges after pledges that are not practical?
Yeah, now the statements made earlier, now I believe this is a learning curve for all of them.
Learning curve. Sri Lanka is taken as a learning curve by the present regime.
They are pretending, right?
Pretending?
Yeah. I mean, now you were mentioning about something about universities.
Universities, free Wi-Fi zones.
Yeah.
Initially they said that Wi-Fi will be available across the country.
Yeah.
Anyone could access Wi-Fi.
Even
However,
yesterday
now,
he mentioned that he will be extending that to certain other...
certain only universities this time around.
Universities already have free Wi-Fi. You don't have to re-extend.
So the Prime Minister made a mistake there.
Not mistake, I think. He would have referred that, the strength of the signal would be increased.
Strength of the signal to be immense. Pledges after pledges being made by the government which cannot be fulfilled. Mr. Asoka Gunawardena?
No, it's like this. Now, I think there was a major move recently towards allowing the facility for Google and to allow the things to happen. Yeah. Now, is that move a correct one or not? Now, we were discussing about whether that will that will interfere with certain security reasons of the country. So those things we need to very carefully plan, and based on that only we can make certain offers and do the things what they were planning to do.
The Prime Minister yesterday said, Mr. Asoka Gunawardena, we will take steps to provide laptops for university students on a 3-year interest-free loan basis, while also providing free Wi-Fi zones for all universities. The Prime Minister obviously was not aware of the higher education institutes in Sri Lanka, I believe. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Naveen, pose a question.
Mr. Tenakon, Ms. Abegunwadana, I want you also to join in this conversation. We are talking about the slowdown in construction. But obviously when this megapolis project, when that properly kicks off, when it gets to the nuts and bolts, we will see a construction boom again, won't we?
Well, we are hoping that it will happen like that. But, well, in my own opinion, simple opinion, I think we have jumped the priorities by 1 or 2 steps in going into megapolis at this stage.
Why is that?
Because of the critical state of the economy of the country, because of other priority areas which require immediate attention, which also because there are other areas where you have to speedily venture into to speed up the processes for the future of the country in the long run.
What are these other areas that you...
Like the productivity, like the human resource development, like the labor force. All these are matters, they are living in some places, in some areas, there is the poverty is below the expected standards.
Do you have faith, given the Prime Minister's statement, and we have a general idea of what we can expect from the 2016 budget now? Of course, it's not set in stone, so until the budget is actually presented, we won't know for sure. But do you have faith that this current government, this national unity government, will be able to address those issues?
The prelude, we should rather take it as a prelude to the budget of the statement made by the Prime Minister, doesn't indicate that that priority has been taken care of or looked into.
But the Prime Minister does talk about addressing the wealth gap, inequality between the rich and the poor.
It is a statement, but there is nothing solid as a policy to rely on or to accept.
Mr. Abegunatha, do you agree with Mr. Tennakoon? Do you think that the megapolis project is not a priority for the country?
I do not agree with that. Now, initially I have to state that construction industry cannot develop forever. We need to establish a certain infrastructure, and then it will be saturated. The point is now in which direction we are directing our construction work. Now here I believe, I have no clear idea what exactly the plan of this megapolis is, but we need to address certain burning issues at the center itself, like transport. We need to take certain planned approach towards that. So towards that we need to have things to happen. But I agree to a certain extent that we need to very carefully prioritize these things. Now in rural areas, now the construction may happen in rural areas as far as the rural roads are concerned, and how the renewable energy industry can be developed in rural areas. In those areas there may be certain new developments happening, construction work happening. But my understanding is that if we are getting ready for the new era, it's essential that we are not building the infrastructure which needs fossil fuels, in energy intensive. Instead of that, we need to establish infrastructure in such a way that we will be able to maintain sustainable lifestyles.
So Mr. Abegunatha, in terms of green technology, Sri Lanka, the problem in Sri Lanka is that we don't own much of the green technology, the technology that allows you to get a higher energy output from green sources, from renewable sources of energy. A lot of that would have to be imported from abroad. For example, solar cells that can hold more energy. For example, the rudimentary, the basic solar powered cell is not going to give you much. So in Sri Lanka's case, for example, even with the megapolis project, if you're going to have it as a green project, if you're going to have it as a sustainable city, a self-sufficient city that runs on solar power, wind power, whatever it is, you're still going to have to be spending a lot of money on the technology which you will have to buy from abroad, the green technology which you'll have to buy from abroad. If, as the minister says, in order to have a homegrown solution, the government will have to spend a lot of money on research and development. Do you think that this will happen through this budget, that the government's allocation for research for R&D will be any different to what it has been over the past few years, which is abysmal to say?
I need to correct what you mentioned. Now renewable energy technologies, if you are saying that it's imported, then how about the oil and coal technologies? It's also imported. But the point is, if you establish renewable energy infrastructure, then running cost is zero or not imported. Whereas if you establish a coal or oil fire plant, we need to continuously import oil or coal because we don't have proven coal reserves anyway. There's a tendency that there may be oil, but coal power plants establishing, the technology should be imported and fuel is also need to be imported. Whereas renewable energy, we are blessed with renewable energy because we have year-round sunshine.
We have the sources, we have the renewable energy sources, but the technology to tap into those sources is what Sri Lanka is lacking.
Now, that we need to phase out. Now, if we are to establish 20 megawatts of, let's say, wind, we cannot have any local value addition. But if you are thinking of 2000 megawatts of wind, then we don't need to import everything. We can think of local value addition. But coal power plants, we cannot do that. We will be purchasing 300 megawatts of coal, few numbers. There's no possibility for local level addition. So renewable energy technologies, if you develop, let's assume we are thinking of 3000 megawatts of solar, then there may be definitely opportunity for a local value addition. Then we can think of having local factories which may approach the Indian market as well.
Based on what the Prime Minister said yesterday, do you see the government heading in this direction? Are we seriously considering renewable and sustainable energy sources?
As other gentlemen mentioned, now these are just statements which is not clearly stating
But statements
which
are
direction
meant
we
to
leading.
indicate vision.
But
The Prime Minister makes a statement to indicate to the people of Sri Lanka, this is my vision. So based on what the Prime Minister has indicated through his statement, do you believe that we can see a shift towards a greener Sri Lanka?
as a vision statement, as he was highlighting the need of sustainable development, to that extent, it's okay. But beyond that, what will happen in the power sector, what will happen in the agriculture sector is yet to be seen.
Will there be
I see a
emphasis
contradiction.
will there be emphasis, Mr. Vijayawardena, on construction in the 2016 budget?
Yeah, I think now what is needed today is that, because if you go through this megapolis construction project, it has to be pre-planned, it has to be debated, it has to be analyzed by a multi-discipline team, because not necessarily the people who know architecture, but people who know sociology, environmental science, engineering, chemistry. It has to be evaluated by a multidisciplinary, then only it has to be signed off. So these steps have to be taken into account if you want to go through the proper economic policy governance.
Mr. Vijayawardena, given your experience in dealing with these state structures, I mean, we were talking earlier about your proposal for a social security board that went through all of this, the processes, and then suddenly got shut down by the Treasury Secretary at the time, if I'm not mistaken. So given the experience that you have with what we've seen, how these things happen in our country, is it realistic to expect that even with the megapolis project we'll get a multidisciplinary team come up with a lot of proposals,
Number one,
and it will all get shut down?
Number one, we need political stability. Number two, we need people of various disciplines coming together and coming up with and designing the future economic policy.
So, for us, you have
But I see a little bit of contradiction. Earlier we said that the Prime Minister says we don't have the money, we mustn't live beyond our means. So where on earth is he going to find all this money for the megapolis? It's one more misleading statement from our dear Prime Minister.
No. What he has actually said is that we don't have enough resources to consume. But he hasn't said that we don't have enough resources for construction purposes.
So they're going to borrow even more money?
No. What
No
he
difference from the
actually
last
he has suggested, what he has suggested is we'll have to cut down our consumption, generate a surplus there, use that surplus for capital investment. That is what his statement has conveyed. Plus whatever we borrow from other sources for the capital expenditure program.
Utopia. Utopia. The Prime Minister is living in
Well, I
utopia.
mean, we have to wait and see. I mean, you can't evaluate it right now, but
No.
probably as the things
Faraz
happen.
Nadeem, usually statements need to outline the government's vision. However, we saw statements being made that the decentralized funds of parliamentarians will be increased to 10 million. However, I hear that the parliamentarians are yet to receive this money.
That's right.
Statements outlining the vision. Final round of Face the Nation after this short commercial break. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today has been the state of the economy and budget 2016. The final round, we start off with Mr. Ashok Abegunwardena. Mr. Abegunwardena, what are your expectations from the 2016 budget? Your time starts now.
I think the most important event that will happen after January 8th is this particular budget, because until now we were discussing about very, very short-term issues other than the 19th Amendment. That's the only major thing that happened, had a long-term impact. So my belief is that instead of concentrating on short-term benefits or gains, we are expecting from the government a long-term proper strategy for developing the country in the right direction, probably not only during the next 3 to 4 years, but for the next term as well, because we have a national government. So irrespective of whether there's a change after the next election, this probably can establish the platform for the next 10 years or so. So that's very important. From that perspective, we need to make sure that not only to discuss about the processes that need to be changed, establishing decision-making processes, but in what direction we are working. So the priorities are very important. If you don't have the right priorities, even though that will be beneficial for the nation, now I think the most important issue we were facing during the last regime was that accelerated development programs happened, but the priorities were not the priorities of the nation. So in this case, we need to be very careful that we will be addressing the core issues and concentrating on that and developing certain actions, and that should be implemented within the next year as to lay down the foundation and then improve. I think it's likely that they will have a major program for the agricultural sector. I believe my priority is energy, so in that sector if we can go for renewable energy, that will be an added advantage. And the burning issue is we need to have a certain plan for the transport sector. So in all these sectors we are expecting some major shift in the approach and come up with a better foundation for the next 10 years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abhigunwardana. We now move on to Mr. Vijay Wardana, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank. Mr. Vijay Wardana, what can we expect from the 2016 budget? Pledges after pledges, or actual practical steps that will be taken to strengthen the country's economy?
Well, I think since the Prime Minister has already set the ball moving, his statement should be the foundation for the Minister of Finance to prepare his budget. So therefore, the budget has to be aligned with the overall development strategy of the government. Now, what I have to mention here is that we are in an economic crisis, but that's not the end of the world. We had been in economic crisis in the past and we have been able to manage them properly, and therefore if we have proper management systems, we will be able to come out of the current crisis as well. Now, one good sign I have seen is, now earlier the government had refused to go before IMF for a facility. Now of course today I read in the newspapers the Finance Minister has said that he is going to get a special enhancement facility of $4.5 billion US, which is sufficient for us to meet the next 12 months loan repayments only. At least it will settle take the pressure on the rupee to depreciate the foreign exchange market. But with that, we can't go on borrowing anymore for that kind of operations. So we have to come to the proper economic planning where we would be directing the economy towards the future growth. For that, I think the budget 2016 will be the foundation, and that foundation has to be linked with the budgets that are to be submitted by the government in the years to come. So with that, we will be able to come out of the crisis, otherwise the situation will be worse.
Mr. Vijay Wardana, before I leave you tonight, one final question. You said that the Minister of Finance need to formulate the budget. How the Minister of Finance does not even have the banks under him?
Well, he doesn't have to have the banks. I mean, remember, the budget is simply taxing people and spending the money through government agencies. The banks are not there.
Taxing the people and spending the money from the government agencies. I now move on to Mr. Risiripala Thendakon, who was a former bank as well. A lot of pledges, Mr. Thendakon, have been made by the present regime. A pricing formula for fuel was discussed. Then they discussed about increasing the decentralized funds to 10 million, increasing public sector wages to 10,000 rupees. You spoke about a cow-buffalo combination. My question to you is, are they waiting until the cows fly over the moon? Your time starts now.
Yeah, well, as I initially stated, the government has made a number of statements which are not practicable, which are not being made with a proper plan ahead. So now there is a plan of reformation put forward by the Prime Minister, but that plan also has certain steps or certain proposals which sort of supersede the status that it should be. Now, for example, We are trying to reform a provident fund scheme in the country, whereas the existing provident fund has not been properly utilized or properly used or properly helping the people, the members. So many things can be done by using this provident fund. It is in a mess today. To taking a loan, the record keeping, the funding, the investments, everything is in a mess. Now we are going a step ahead without correcting those inherent weaknesses in the existing system. This is what we say when we make proclamations. First we must carefully assess where we are. Isn't there anything better that we can do to the existing situation than moving on to a new situation? Or can we move to a new situation with this burden on us of having a mess in certain things? So this is where we have to be very, very careful. I think this applies to all the sectors, every concerns. Now, borrowing is a very dangerous thing. You know, it becomes first private, then it becomes public, then it finally becomes sovereign. You know, this has been the trend in the world. All these advisors and investing people have been advising so that we resulted in ultimately the sovereign burden coming on us. That means everyone is sharing this. This is what happened in the central bank, the bond issue. It's not a question of just facilitating some person, individual. What has it resulted? It has resulted in the whole country having to bear a big burden for many years and many decades. So this is bad. So what I would suggest is, as members of the public, we look forward to a government plan which addresses the current issues in the current perspective and rectifying the existing situation before we step into new areas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ruchirpal Thennakoon. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Mr. Asoka Begunwardhan for joining us this evening. Mr. W. Jivardhan, thank you very much, sir, for joining us this evening. And also Mr. Ruchirpal Thennakoon for joining us this evening. Thank you very much, Nadeem, young Chaturang, and also investigative journalist Faraz Shaukat Ali for joining us this evening. I leave you tonight with a quote. The government's view of the economy could be summed up in a few phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. Now what do you want? More taxes? More regulations? Or subsidies? 20th of November, you will have the answer. Let's wait and see. Thank you very much for joining us tonight on Face the Nation. Take care and good night.